Apurida, Eka Chakrata, Gangamaya, Yamunamaya, Tulsi, Bhakti. Transcendental book distribution, Harinam Sankirtan, transcendental psalm distribution. Samveda Bhaktivinoda Gaur, all glorious, all glorious, all glorious, all glorious, Shri Guru, Shri Guru.
Krishna Krishna
No. Jai Ram Damadham Kunjabihari Jai Ram Damadham Kunjabihari Gopi Janmasana Devardhana Yasoda Nandana Braja Janarajata Yamuna Tirna Vanajavati Jaya Amara Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare All glories to someone. All glories to someone. All glories to someone. Shri Shri Guru Shri Gopal. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Galanjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shnapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutam Padakam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Harijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Devi Priya Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we are on Canto 3, Chapter 25, texts 31 and 32, I think today, is that right? So I'll just read the first Sanskrit, and then we can responsibly do the second Sanskrit, verse 32. Maitreya Uvacha Vit Vartam Kapilo Vidit Vartam Kapilo Matur Itam Yatas Deho Yakratan Va Bijata Tatvan Nayam Yat Pravadanti Sankyam Vacha Bhakti Vitana Yogam Maitreya Uvacha Vidit Vartam Kapilo Master Itam Jata Sneho Yakratan Tadva Vijata Tadvam Nayam Yat Padav Pravadanti Sankyam Pravacha Bhakti Vitana Yogam. So the translation to this verse is, Sri Maitreya said, after hearing the statement of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate toward her because of being born from her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization, as received by the cyclic succession. So I'll just recite that again just by myself. Sri Maitreya said, after hearing the statement of his mother, Kapila could understand her purpose, and he became compassionate toward her because of being born from her body. He described the Sankhya system of philosophy, which is a combination of devotional service and mystic realization as received by the cyclic succession. So here is the one we can do actually responsibly. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Devanam Gunalinganam Anushavika Karmanam Anushavika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Sattva Evaika Manaso Vritti Swabhaviki Tuya Vritti Swabhaviki Tuya Anita Bhagavat Animita Bhagavati Animita Bhagavati Bhakti Siddher Garishyasi Bhakti Siddher Garishyasi Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushavika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Vritti Swabhaviki Tuya Anmita Bhagavati Bhakti Siddher Garishyasi Shri Bhagavan Vacha Devanam Gunalinganam Anushavika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Vritti Swabhaviki Tuya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Devanam Gunavindana. Anushravika Karmanam. Sattva Ekaika Manaso. Vritti Swabhaviki Priya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Devanam Gunavindana. Anushravika Karmanam. Sattva Ekaika Manaso. Vritti Swabhaviki Priya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Devanam Gunavindana. Anushravika Karmanam. Sattva Ekaika Manaso. Vritti Swabhaviki Priya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Devanam Gunavindana. Anushravika Karmanam. Sattva Ekaika Manaso. Vritti Swabhaviki Priya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. Devanam Gunavindana. Anushravika Karmanam. Sattva Ekaika Manaso. Vritti Swabhaviki Priya. Animita Bhagavati. Bhakti Siddhir Garishyasi. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Devanam, of the senses, or the presiding deities of the senses. Gunalinganam, which detects sense objects. Anushravika, according to scripture. Karmanam, which works. Sattve, unto the mind or unto the Lord. Eva, only. Ekamanasaha, of a man of undivided mind. Vritti, inclination. Swabhaviki, natural. Tu, in fact. Ya, which. Animita, without motive. Bhagavati, to the personality of Godhead. Bhakti, devotional service. Siddhe, Gariyasi. Better. So the translation reads, Lord Kapila said, the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic conjunction. As the senses are representatives of the demigods, so the mind is a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. Was far better even than salvation. So we can recite this English responsibly. Lord Kapila says, the senses are symbolic representations of the demigods, and their natural inclination is to work under the direction of the Vedic conjunction. As the senses are representatives of the demigods, so the mind is representative of the Supreme Personality of God. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in devotional service to the personality of Godhead, without any motive, that is far better than even salvation. Here is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. The senses of the living entity are always engaged in some occupation, either in activities prescribed in injunctions of the Vedas or in material activities. The natural inclination of the senses is to work for something, and the mind is the center of the senses. The mind is actually the leader of the senses, and therefore it is called sattva. Similarly, the leader of all the demigods who are engaged in activities of this material world, the sun god, moon god, Indra, and others, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic literature that the demigods are different limbs of the universal body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Our senses are also controlled by different demigods. Our senses are representations of various demigods, and the mind is the representation of the Supreme Personality of God. The senses, led by the mind, act under the influence of the demigods. When the service is ultimately aimed at the Supreme Personality of God, the senses are in their natural position. The Lord is called Rishikesh, where he is actually the proprietor and ultimate master of the senses. The senses of the mind are naturally inclined to work, but when they are materially contaminated, they work for some material benefit or for the service of the demigods. Although actually they are meant to serve the Supreme Personality of God. The senses are called Krishnika, and the Supreme Personality of God is called Rishikesha. Indirectly, all the senses are naturally inclined to serve the Supreme Lord. That is called bhakti. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Evanam Gunalinganam Anushavika Karmanam Sattva Evaika Manaso Vritti Swabhaviki Tuya Animikta Bhagavati Bhaktir Siddhar Gariyasi. Lord Kapila said, the senses are symbolic representations of demigods, and their natural inclinations to work under the direction of the Vedic conjunction. As the senses are representatives of the demigods, so the mind is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The mind's natural duty is to serve. When that service spirit is engaged in devotional service to the personality of Godhead without any motivation, that is far better even than salvation. So now we are entering into an actual description of the Sankhya system. Sankhya is a somewhat technical topic of discussion because it is basically describing from a Vedic point of view how the reality that we wander around in, how it is actually functioning, what is its constituent parts. In a broad view, we hear about this a number of times. It's actually interesting how many times in Bhagavatam, more or less the same explanation is given, varies to some extent. But basically, we have this idea that there are 24 elements, and those are the 24 elements of Sankhya. We begin with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, and from Krishna's effulgence, which is called the Brahma Jyoti, or just sometimes the Jyoti. It shines in all directions. And when this Brahma Jyoti is scaled down and contaminated by material energy, it becomes what is known as the pradhan. So the Jyoti is actually spiritual. It is the emanation of many, many living entities emanating from the Supreme Lord, like a photon emanating from the sun. But when the Supreme Lord glances and moves this Brahma Jyoti into the material world, at that point, it changes into what's known as the pradhan, which is the undifferentiated material energy. So the pradhan is inert, it's not doing anything. However, the Supreme Lord agitates it by injecting the living entities into it. And when the pradhan is agitated, it becomes what we know of as the Mahatat. So the Mahatat is the pradhan once the pradhan has been agitated. So the pradhan is described like a very still, clear, pure pool with no waves in it or nothing contaminating it at all. But when the Supreme Lord agitates it by his glance, then varieties begin to appear. And the first thing that's generated is what's called ahankara, or false ego. And the false ego is generated in 3 different flavors. We have false ego in the mode of goodness, false ego in the mode of passion, and false ego in the mode of ignorance. So this pradhan, which was inert and not manifesting anything, is now becoming differentiated. And now the first thing that has evolved from it or precipitated from this Mahatat is false ego in the mode of goodness, false ego in the mode of passion, false ego in the mode of ignorance. So false ego in the mode of goodness generates some of these 24 elements of Sankhya philosophy. Particularly, false ego in the mode of goodness generates the demigods in control of the senses. Now, these are not all the demigods. It generates the particular 10 demigods, which are controllers of various senses. So we have 5 knowledge acquiring senses called the Pancha Jnanendriya, and we have the 5 working senses, Pancha Karmendriya. Jnanendriya are knowledge acquiring, Karmendriya are the working sense. So 5 and 5 make 10, and they're 10 demigods. Each demigod has control over one of these senses in a very basic way. So the senses are linked with the demigods, but the development of these 10 senses does not happen from the ahankara or false ego in the mode of goodness. Rather, it happens from ahankara in the mode of passion. From ahankara in the mode of passion, the 10 senses develop. So the 10 demigods are developed in ahankara in the mode of goodness, and the 10 senses that they control are developed in ahankara in the mode of passion. Now, also from the mode of goodness is generated the mind, which refers to as sattva here in this report. So from ahankara in the mode of goodness come 10 demigods in charge of various senses and the mind, and then ahankara in the mode of passion generates the 10 knowledge acquiring senses and the 10 working senses. Of course, knowledge acquiring senses are the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ear, the belly, and the genital, or the skin. Oh, how many have I got there? Eyes, ears, nose, mouth, or tongue, and the skin. So that's 5. Knowledge acquiring senses. We receive information from the outside world through the Gyan Indriya, the knowledge acquiring sense. We work in the outside world through the Karma Indriya, the 5 working senses. And those are, of course, the tongue, which does 2 functions. It tastes and it vibrates. So tongue is a working sense in the sense that we are speaking, like I'm speaking right now. So the tongue is not getting input, but it's putting out information into the world. So it's the tongue, we have the arms, the belly, the legs, the anus and genitals. These are the 5 working senses, and they are the way that we interact and make our presence known in the outside world. These are what are known as the working senses. So we've talked about false ego, the mode of goodness. We've now talked about false ego, the mode of passion. I believe also the intelligence or the mind, one of those 2, is also developed in the mode of passion. Now, ahankara in the mode of ignorance develops the tanmatra and the panchamahabhuta, or the 5 gross elements. So that's earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And also the tanmatra, which are the subtle sense objects, which are known as form, touch, taste, smell, and sound. So form is the visual part. Taste is the sense organ of taste is coming from the tongue. So we have the sound, which is the what's perceived by the ear. We have touch, which is what's perceived by the skin. So these are the subtle sense objects known as the tanmatra. And these are developed in succession. So we hear that first of all, there is the ether, sometimes known as Kam or Akash. There's a number of names for it. And its subtle sense object that's associated with it is sound. And from sound generating ether, we get the property of air, and air has touch. So this goes on. I'm not going to give the whole breakdown, but we go through all 10 of the gross sense objects and the subtle sense objects. So the gross ones are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And then I said the subtle ones: touch, taste, form, sound, smell. So those are generated from false ego in the mode of ignorance. So now we have the whole business there. We have the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, 5 working senses, we have the 5 gross elements, we have the 5 subtle sense objects, so that's 20. We have mind, intelligence, and false ego. Those were generated at the very beginning, mind being generated in, I think, the either in the mode of ignorance or in the mode of actually, no, it's mode of goodness. We just talked about it. It's mode of goodness. And then intelligence, mode of passion. So now we have 23, and the last one is time, kala, or sometimes it's described as a jiva, the spirit soul. So these are the 24 elements of Sankhya philosophy. They interact, and we experience the world, and we can make our choices. We can direct the senses towards various material objectives, or we can direct the senses towards the service of the Supreme Lord. So most living entities are completely unaware that there's the other option, that we can direct the senses towards the Supreme Lord. They're of the understanding that there's only one thing to direct the senses towards, and that is material objects. And so from the time we're a little child, we grow up and we recognize that some sense objects, some sense experiences are pleasant to our senses, and others are not pleasant. And we see our friends, our parents, people in our society, our teachers, everyone constantly engaged in the process of trying to increase the amount of pleasurable sense input that we have and decreasing the amount of undesirable sense experience that we have. So everybody's doing this 24/7 around the clock. We're discovering, well, I like this, I don't like this. I'm going to figure out how to get more of this and less of that. And so this is what the mind is continually preoccupied with. So Krishna tells us that the mind is the best friend or the worst enemy. And the mind is described as the controller of the senses. The mind directs individual senses toward one object, or alternatively, a different object. Normally, the mind is directing the senses from various sense objects to that sense object which optimizes what the mind considers to be the most important sense gratification. So that's normally what's going on. That we are looking at things, well, would I rather go to sleep now or eat something, or would I rather watch this thing on TV, or would I rather just go and take a bath or something because I feel very tired? You know, so in other words, the mind is just deciding which form of sense gratification is the most appealing at this moment in time, and it's directing senses. In Bhagavad Gita, I believe it's in chapter 3, text 34, maybe it's 634, I don't remember which one. There is a description of the chariot of the body. So there is described that there is a chariot, and the horses are 5, and they are the senses. And in the image that we have in Bhagavad Gita, those who have Bhagavad Gita with some color plates, and then we'll see that there is a horse with a tongue on it, on the breastplate that it has, you know, a picture of a tongue on another horse with a picture of an eye on it, another horse with a picture of a hand on it, or it's not a hand, but a picture, a picture of a hand, another one with a picture of a ear on it, you know. So these 5 senses are rummaging through the material world, deciding what is worthy right now of focus. And the mind is directing because the mind is not able to take it all in at the same time. We can't have the 5 horses going in 5 separate directions. They all have to go in one direction. So therefore, the mind is described like the reins of the horses. So from each horse's mouth, there is a bit, and there is usually a leather strap that goes from the horse's mouth to the driver. And the driver pulls the heads of the horses in one direction or another. And depending on where the reins are pulled is where the whole chariot will go. So whichever way we pull the reins in that direction, the whole chariot will go. And who's driving the chariot? Yes, it's the intelligence. The mind is the reins. The intelligence is the driver. So the driver is the one that makes the decisions. On what basis does the driver make his decision? What's that?
Based on the type of essence.
All right. Can you elaborate that a little bit more?
Based on what driver wants.
Well, right. But the driver is like a chauffeur in this case.
The passenger wants.
Well, right. Something like that. So generally speaking, we all have cars and everybody has a GPS. There'd be no question of going anywhere without a GPS. We would just be completely at the mercy of the material world. We get out there, drive in circles wherever we are. But we are safe now because we have little satellites buzzing overhead and they're constantly communicating with our phone. Our phone tells us we are now on, what is it, Grand River Road or not? And we find we're in this highway or that highway. The little arrow tells us exactly our spot, and we know where we're going. So in the material world, usually the driver, the intelligence, has no GPS. He is just going by which horse is pulling the strongest. So in other words, the horses are deciding where the chariot goes. And if you think about that, that's pretty scary. If you had a chariot and it was the horses that were figuring out where you're going to go, wouldn't be such a good proposition. Now, if the driver has a GPS in this chariot of the body analogy, what would that GPS be? Right. So Shastra is a GPS. So the driver knows, oh, this is bad sense gratification over here. If I do this, I will get horrible karma. So I'm going to move the horses away from the horses are going that way. The intelligence understands I have been given a map by the GPS of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, and I know that I don't want to go there. That will be trouble, big trouble. I don't want to go there, big trouble. I'm going to avoid that. I'm going to pull the horses in another direction. So therefore, the intelligence has been trained up. But most people's intelligence has not been trained up. They know nothing about Shastra, that they're not interested in Shastra. They think that happiness will happen by following whichever horse is the most strong at this moment in time. And so people go throughout their lives, moment to moment, deciding what type of sense gratification is more important at this moment. Of course, sometimes they make big ticket decisions. They decide, well, I'm going to go to college so that I will get a wonderful degree. And with that wonderful degree, I will get a great job in a first-class mercantile organization of some type or another. And therefore, my life will be wonderful from that point on. So I may want to go drinking with my friends or go out to some kind of dance or something like that, but I am instead going to focus on my test that I'm having tomorrow, and therefore I'm giving up what appears to be good sense gratification, because I know in the future I'll have maximum sense gratification when I get this degree, when I get this big good job, when I get all this money coming in. So we make decisions based on sense gratification, and the mind is the reins, and the intelligence is deciding. The intelligence is usually deciding based on sense gratification. Now, what is the passenger doing? In this analogy of the chariot of the body, what is the passenger doing?
So there is the soul, and he is watching what is going on. Sometimes he is covered by the intellect, he is covered by the mind. Whoever is a strong opponent, he just gave selected with that.
Okay. So the soul or the passenger is the sufferer or enjoyer in tandem with whatever the chariot of the body is doing. We are not the body, but if we are not acting on the platform of not being the body, it doesn't matter that we're not the body. We will perceive ourselves to be the body. And all the bad karma from all the wrong things we're doing will shoot like arrows into our lives, various kinds. So people are making one mistake after another, accruing various kinds of karma, and then therefore they're suffering. So this chariot of the body is an analogy given. And so therefore we learn that what we should do is train the intelligence. And of course, the intelligence doesn't want to be trained, but if we listen and try to follow the directions in Scripture, we will not be able to follow perfectly, and we will not be able to follow all the time. But the more we struggle to follow all the time, the more we struggle to follow perfectly, the more we realize that we become aware we're not this body, and we actually experience transcendental happiness, which comes from the process of pure devotional service. But of course, in the beginning, we're not doing pure devotional service, we're doing mixed devotional service. So sometimes we do some things for Krishna, and sometimes we're still working with our amazing material plan for how we are going to enjoy the material universe. We were born with one, and by the time we're probably 10 years old, we've been through 2 or 3 amazing plans of how we're going to enjoy the material world that didn't work. So we've tried 2 or 3. By the time we're in college or just out of college, then we've been through maybe 5 amazing plans of how we were going to enjoy the universe that didn't work out. So the interesting thing is, the more specific that your plan is of how you are going to enjoy, the less likely it is to occur. Because the material nature don't care. Material nature is going to do what the material nature is going to do. It has to do with our past karma. So we have very specific ideas of what will make us happy. Then you can put your money on the fact that it's not going to quite line up that way. Something's going to be off. Something's not going to quite work out the way we hoped it would. And therefore we will, as the mind is, we all know this, and the psychologists know this too. You have 20 good things that happen to you in the day. But one thing that was not good, which will you focus on? Right. What is perverse about the mind? That 20 good things will happen, one bad thing will happen, but we will focus on the one bad thing that will happen. So therefore, the mind is set up to drive itself crazy. And the mind is set up to focus on all the wrong things. And because we are focusing on material happiness, something is always not going to be right. It's not quite warm enough. It's a little too cool, or it's a little too hot, or now it's a little too dry, or it's too windy, or now it's raining, or now it's snowing, or now they put too much spice in the sabji and I don't like it, it's too spicy, or it's not spicy enough, or they served all the not so interesting things first, and now I'm full, but now the good stuff comes out. I don't have any room. So all these things are the way the mind tortures itself. And so if we learn to ignore the mind, if we learn to ignore the mind and try to engage in devotional service, we will notice that sometimes things are according to the way our senses would like them, and sometimes they're not, but we don't care so much anymore. We stop keeping track. We put the schoolwork away. Today at 7:35 a.m., this good thing happened, that bad thing happened. And then 15 minutes later, it was like that. We start putting the scoreboard away. Instead, we think about, well, what is our service? And depending on what we focus on is what we experience. This is called sometimes the pool of the mind. So the mind is described like a big pool sometimes, instead of rain, it's sometimes also described as a big pool. And there's things in the bottom we don't see because they're at the bottom. You don't see the bottom of a pool of water, especially if it's very deep. So sometimes they bubble up from the bottom there. And where did that come from? Weird thing comes into our mind. Krishna, we want to get rid of it, so it bubbles up from somewhere down there, bottom of the pool. And but whatever the mind is, we're focusing on some aspect of it. We can't focus on everything. Like I was saying the other day, if I say, what's your left leg doing right now? You weren't thinking about your left leg at all, but now suddenly you think, well, what's happening with my left leg? Maybe it itches, maybe it's starting to cramp, maybe it's, feeling okay, whatever. So we exclude so much from what is possible to perceive. We can't take it all in like Krishna does. We can only narrow our focus to one, two things very much in the center. So this is the process of focusing the mind. So as we hear in the 6th chapter, from whatever and wherever the mind wanders to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw and fix it upon the self. So fixing it upon the self means fixing it upon the self as servant of the Supreme, and some kind of service that the individual is doing for the Supreme. So in this way, the more we can do that, the more we actually experience liberation from the difficulties of material nature, and we begin to experience the happiness of spiritual life. This is the way that the whole process works. Now, Sankhya gets into the weeds and explains some details here, but this description is just reminding us that the senses are a trap. They appear to be the way we get happiness, but they're not actually the way we get happiness. Happiness does not come through the senses, not in any substantial way. Certainly, you have a big ice cream cone, and eat it, feel happy at least for a few moments. But any big ticket, long lasting, deep feeling of satisfaction does not come to us through the senses. It comes from within. And we recognize that according to Bhagavad Gita, happiness is had through service to the Supreme. And this is what is so, I call it the completely unlikely reality. That we, if I say that, okay, you have senses, you know that some things are pleasurable to the senses, and some things are not. So make an effort to be aware, very conscious of what's pleasurable, what's not, and then engineer your life to maximize those things which are pleasurable to the senses. And that sounds very reasonable. Sounds very scientific, sounds very reasonable, but it doesn't work. Now, if I tell you instead, now, if you really want to be happy, serve the Supreme Lord. That doesn't sound reasonable at all, because we think if I'm serving somebody, I'm doing something for somebody else. I'm not trying to enjoy myself. How is that going to make me happy? It doesn't sound at all reasonable, but it works, which is what's bizarre. But, you know, I didn't create the world. It's just that way. And the Supreme Lord made it that way. So eventually we get whacked, beat, kicked, and knifed by the material nature enough times that we start to think, well, maybe there's something to this doing devotional service stuff that I've been hearing about in these classes. I try to stay away, but sometimes I don't. And so I hear about this, let me try it. So let me try doing this devotional service. And we find, yeah, you know, it's not half bad. I really want to still enjoy a lot of Zen stuff, but you know, devotional service has got something going there. So I try to do that more. And eventually we discover that happiness is something that we never even tasted, not even slightly a drop of, because what real happiness is spiritual and on a level that we can only read about right now, but we don't have any direct access. So that's the process. And Kapila Dev will explain it to his mother. And by the way, I just wanted to mention as an aside, there is a fake Kapila Dev too, that Prabhupada always mentions. There is a Kapila who I think was about 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, and he is not the Kapila Dev of Devahuti. And he taught a philosophy that was basically materialism. And it was also called Sankhya. But this Kapila Dev is Buddhist, so we should not confuse the two. So whenever we're talking about Kapila Dev, we're talking about Devahuti Putra Kapila Dev, not the other Kapila Dev. All right, so we'll leave some time for questions and comments. Oh my God, 15 after. And I'll have to run soon to make sure that Prahladananda Swami doesn't chastise me for being late to my Zoom. Yes.
Maharaj, thank you so much for a very, very introspective class. I was just thinking about the whole explanation about the struggle with the mind. Very interestingly, Kapila Dev mentions in the translation that mind is a representation of Supreme Personality of Godhead. I was personally struggling. Ideally, Supreme Father is always helping us to grow in spiritual life, to ultimately go to the abode from where we came back, or we came here. How can the mind, because today, we just talked, we spoke elaborately about the mind, so much trouble it gives. Even when we practice devotional service, like when I'm dressing the deities, I'm thinking about, oh, you know, what are the other devotees I would say, rather than focusing on whether I'm pleasing Krishna. I'm trying to chant. I know that's the goal of life, and that's the way to achieve perfection. But the same mind is not making me reach there.
Right.
How do we connect these dots together?
Well, the mind is controlled by, you know, whatever and whenever mind wanders due to this flickering and stage, and one must certainly withdraw and fix it upon himself. That's what Krishna is saying in Bhagavad Gita. So we have to constantly battle the mind, as Bhaktisiddhanta said, that in the morning you beat the mind 100 times with a broomstick, and in the evening you beat the mind 100 or 1,000 times with a shoe. So this is kind of, unfortunately, the reality that we have to constantly work against our mind. But the interesting thing is that if you fight the battle in the mind against wrong attitudes, wrong thinking, and all that stuff, what happens in the outside world is a piece of cake. You don't find any serious issues in the real world. It's when you don't fight the battle upstairs that the material energy drags real problems in your life. Even if you have some serious problem in the external world, if your mind is constantly trying to understand what's right and what's wrong, refocusing on Krishna, then even external problems don't seem like such a big deal. But if we don't fight the battle and let the mind orbit around all kinds of, the monkey mind will orbit around all kinds of weird things, bad things, And if we let it do that, then in the external world, some big demon will come and attack us, and we will have to deal with it, and that will be part of our lives.
Can I ask one follow-up question?
Well, I think I'm going to have to ask just one more question, because I got started late, and so now I'm up against, I have to get back to the house, get the computer fired up, and get on the Zoom conference. So one more question and then I'll dash off.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, very grateful for your divine presence and this wonderful lectures. My question is, Maharaj, in the purport, there is a sentence which says, unless one is liberated, one cannot engage the senses in devotional service. So I'm trying to understand, Maharaj, is it not the opposite?
One cannot engage in such pure devotional service. So we learned that devotional service is always pure, but the person performing it may not be pure. And what does it mean when the person is not pure? That means he's performing devotional service, but it's not apoitikina pratiyata. That means that he's performing it intermittently, and he's performing it with some motivation. So in the beginning, that's basically all we've got. We can't perform devotional service purely, but we're performing it to the best of our ability. And because we're performing to the best of our ability, we are making some progress. And I better run. So yeah, I've got 10 minutes to get back over there and get the computer on. So unless Prahlad Swami got the time wrong again, so in which case I'll be okay. But I can't count on that. I shouldn't count on it. He just sent me an email this morning saying 9:30. So I better go. Thank you all very much for your kind attention. All aboard.
Swami Maharaj ki
Jai!